Testing, testing. Hello, everyone. I just want to give you a little bit of an update. Councillor Morgan is away and won't be able to attend, and Ms. Higgs is also unable to attend. So we're waiting on Councillor Turner. He's not late yet, but he did send a message saying he was in a meeting and might be late arriving. We cannot start the meeting until Councillor Turner is here. If he doesn't get here before 12:30, we won't be having a meeting. So hopefully he does. Until he does, find some other things to do, I guess. There are sandwiches in the lounge if you want to get into the lounge. There's some snacks. Okay.
Can we do karaoke in the meantime?
No, we cannot. No. Okay. Okay, just a little update. I think Counselor Turner will be here at 12:13, 12:15, around there, so you have 10 minutes. If you want to leave and come back, get some food, there's food in the lounge. Okay. Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order now that Councillor Turner is here. He was called into a COVID-19 meeting, and obviously that is an important thing that he had to take care of before he got here. I do want to read the statement at the beginning. The City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing, or advisory committee meetings and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. I will look to colleagues to see if there are any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not so much a conflict in this circumstance, but since the boards and commissions are identified in the the global audit spectrum, I'm an employee of the Middlesex London Health Unit. So should anything come from that, then I would declare it appropriately at that time. Just wanted to raise it as an identifier.
Okay. Seeing none, that takes us to 1.2. This is the election of the vice chair for the term ending November 30th, 2020. As you know, Lori Higgs has been the vice chair for the first year. I have not had any indication from either Councillor Morgan or Ms. Higgs if they are interested in being vice chair. I'll look to the committee to see if there are any nominations for vice chair. Councillor Turner.
I'll nominate Councillor Van Holst.
Councillor Van Holst, are you interested in being vice chair?
I'm happy to do it, as long as I'm not accused of having too many vices. I'm sorry.
I don't think bad jokes count as vices. Councillor Turner, are you interested in being vice chair?
Probably not at this point.
Okay, great. So we have a motion moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Van Holst. We'll open up the voting. All those in favor? Any opposed? Congratulations, Councillor Van Holst. Okay, that brings us to our rather substantial items for direction agenda. I think I'd like to just go through them in the order that they're on the screen. I recognize that a number of them are sort of related, like 4.1 through 4.4, for example. So maybe when we are through the discussion of those items, we'll just deal with them all together, if that works. Okay. Why don't you go ahead, please?
Okay, perfect. So if I can draw your attention to the internal audit dashboard for 2019 as well as 2020 and the observation summary. So from a 2019 perspective, internal audit has completed all the reviews in the approved internal audit plan. There's one review that has been put on hold, which is the Smart City Office pre-implementation assessment, and a future date to complete that work will be considered when that review is ready to go. From a 2020 perspective, we are currently underway with our internal audit plan. We are currently working on the Service London assessment, and we have started the scoping conversations for the clerk's office, and also the class replacement project is continuously ongoing as well. From an observation summary perspective, management has made significant progress over the past few months in terms of closing observations. So as you can see, there are 4 reviews that are complete. The building permit assessment, the health and safety assessment, the housing process assessment, as well as the construction procurement. So over the past few months, we've been able to close 3 high priority observations and 15 medium priority, and the action plans and management's implementation strategies that they have in place. We are content that they're moving forward, and there's no issues from that perspective.
Any questions about the first 2 items there, colleagues? Obviously good news to see no pass-through observations, things being closed out. That's wonderful. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So then that would bring us into our first report, which is the electronic fund transfer. So if I can draw your attention to that report. So this review in 2019, there were significant upgrades that were made to the wire transfers from the facts-based system within Scotia Connect. So we worked with management in terms of scoping what this particular review would look like. So we had agreed that we look at the inbound and outbound activities, we look at the signing officer activities, access permissions, reconciliations between the bank accounts and the general ledger, as well as management oversight activities. The strengths that we found within this particular process was that there was adequate segregation of duties, process documentation, and there was the compliance with the applicable policy requirements, as well as the timeliness of the team that was completing the work. We didn't see issue from that perspective. We also found strengths in terms of the signing officer activities that were taking place. From an observation perspective, there's one medium priority observation, and that was just more around ensuring that there was standard operating procedures for the review of the Scotia Connect system user access. So we found that management was looking at the user access controls, but it was more ad hoc or informal. So our ask of management was to formally document and update when exactly the user access controls would be reviewed. Management has agreed, and they've put a process in place.
Councillor Turner.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question with respect to the recommendation of 1.01. Was there a vulnerability or a potential liability where an employee had to left the employ of the organization but would still maintain access to that transfer portal? It sounds like that's part of the audit process that's required to make sure that those who have access, those who should not have access don't have access anymore, and that there were periods of time where that might not be discovered in a fast enough fashion to prevent any of unauthorized transfers post-employment, for example.
The employees that would touch this part of the process was a small group of employees, and management would be aware of who should have access and who shouldn't. We did go through the process of testing the terminations, and we didn't identify that there was a period of time where if there had been a change in an individual that should have access, that they hadn't been terminated in a timely manner. So no, I would not raise a concern around that particular item.
Any other questions on this one? Okay, if not, maybe go on to 4.6, and then I think we'll have a motion for the first 6 there. Go ahead.
Okay, so the next review is looking at the Dearness Home Process Assessment. So within this review, the purpose and objective was to look at the existing structure, looking at the delegation of responsibilities within the Dearness home, and understanding the roles and responsibilities around administration, clerical roles, as well as the processes that were in place for just the operational management of that particular unit. In terms of the strengths that we found working with that management team, that there was a active commitment to improvement. It was embedded within their operations that they were continuously looking for ways to make improvements. There was a strong understanding of the roles and who had responsibility and accountability over the different functions. The admissions process in terms of accepting individuals into the home, that was well documented and understood as well. And there was the shared purpose to provide the resident care. That culture of understanding of what the home stood for was well known across the employee group. Within this particular review, we did identify 4 medium priority observations. So the first observation was around organizational design and culture. So there has been a few past reorganizations within this particular unit. So what we found in terms of the conversations that we were having was that there is a slight misalignment between the culture and the business objectives. There is a commitment by management to continuously improve the culture, but there just needed to be some more focus on that particular aspect. So what we've recommended is that there is a job activity analysis and a time study that's being done in terms of reorganizing responsibilities where it makes sense, looking at operational plans to engage in understanding better the employee experience, building in some agility into the processes, ensuring that there's some digitalization. So removing manual processes and using digital strategies with what is currently existing within the unit. And also just looking at org design and what they need to do from a long-term success perspective. The other areas was just around continuing having the conversations and building in the commitment to the core values and strategic objectives for the Dearness unit. And then also it was ensuring that there was a link and connection with human resources and helping them through that strategy.
Questions, discussion on this report, colleagues? Councillor Turner.
Just with respect to the operations here, this was independent. The ministry, I'd imagine, conducts a service review as part of its licensure requirements and would have findings, especially amongst, there's administrative processes, I think, that are reviewed, clinical practice processes, things like that. Was that report reviewed as part of this this audit? And if not, perhaps for staff, were there recommendations in the ministry review that align with recommendations from this audit?
From this audit's perspective, we looked at the operations, so anything in regards to quality of care or service that the residents were receiving, that was out of scope for this particular review. So I'd look to management to answer any of the ministry concerns.
Go ahead. You just need to talk a little bit into the mic, yeah. Thank you.
As far as the ministry is concerned, we are totally compliant with all the regulations. The onus or the focus of this internal audit was to look at the functioning of the unit from an efficiency perspective and from an engagement perspective. But as far as the ministry is concerned, they're really looking, when they come in inspectors, to make sure that we are compliant with all the laws in the acts and the regulations, and we certainly are. Our outcomes are very, very good. It's just that our internal process could do with some improvement, and of course through the audit process, and actually we already knew we have some engagement problems, and we also need to better define our operating procedures internally. But we do have an action plan based on the audit's recommendations, and we've already started to work through that.
Thank you. I'm not totally familiar. I was on the Dearness Committee years ago. It sounded that it drew a lot of parallels to the ambulance service licensing process, where a service review is done every 3 years. And as part of that process, they take a look at not only the patient care aspects, but a lot at the administrative processes, the human resources inventory, making sure that staff have the qualifications that they have, that there's processes in place to be able to oversee those licensure requirements more on the administrative side. So I think there's some parallels with the service reviews that long-term care homes go through. So the purpose of the question was the areas that were identified in the internal audit may have also been themes that might have come up in the ministry's review, and I wasn't sure if there might be some alignment and if these opportunities identified help to address some of those concerns that might come up through service review. Those licensure is usually those are given by material compliance with the requirements. There's recommendations usually given, but not necessarily enough to hold back a licensure renewal or something like that. So in this case, I was just looking to see if there was any threads to draw in between those two processes.
In years gone by, the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care, who oversee us, the compliance advisors that we had years ago would do something similar. If they saw a process they thought we could do better, they would give us some guidance along those lines. More recently, after the more recent act was brought in, it's more of an adversarial situation where they come and inspect. They look at what we're doing and the outcomes that we're experiencing. And if there's a fault, we get a notice, either a written notice or a voluntary plan of correction or an order in terms of escalating concern. And certainly, in that more adversarial situation that we have now, we have no concerns regarding the functioning of our clerical team. There have been no written notices, no voluntary plans, and no orders issued as a result of the work that they conduct.
Any other discussion? Councillor Van Holst?
Thank you very much. There was a recommendation for more cross-training. Are there any discussions about that need to take place in camera, for instance?
Certainly, we do have a very specific action plan that we've drafted out. But of course, at this point, that's to guide management. We haven't sort of made that public in the home. But certainly, if you want more details, I can certainly provide those details to you.
Okay, thank you. The plan to have some more standard operating procedures, are there some that you've prioritized to put in place?
What we're doing is that we've actually just appointed one of our managers to oversee all the clerks, other than those that are involved in financial operations. So we're going to have just one manager managing most of the clerks. And the first thing that she's actually doing is looking at our current operating procedures, sitting down with the staff to define new ones that need to be created. And as we go through that process, we'll see the ones that are more higher priority, and they'll be done first.
Okay, well, I was encouraged to hear that you've started on these recommendations already. The medium priority recommendations are suggested we tackle those within the 3 to 6 month period. Do you think you'll be able to accomplish that in the end of half a year?
Well, in terms of our responses to the audit recommendations, we sort of stretched everything out until the end of Q1 2021, because we think that's more realistic in terms of getting these things done. There is as I say, a plan in place, but realistically, it does take time, and the 3 to 6 months period would be inadequate to get all of that work done.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, I did have one question myself, which is on the first recommendation, which is one of those ones that scores higher in terms of complexity. And anytime I see a recommendation like that, I want to make sure that in the planning, we're really providing enough time. You address it with some of the other observations to say, we couldn't do that in 6 months. We do need the full year is basically what we're talking about. For that very first recommendation, 1.01, about the organizational design and culture, do you think March 2021 is really enough time to handle that one?
As we go through the process, I think we may identify there's some challenges that will take more time. As soon as I started working in the home, and I was only appointed in towards the middle of 2018, I could see that we had a challenge in terms of our clerical work. And I do feel that there are some things involved in that first recommendation that may take us more than the year. But again, as we go through the process, as it evolves, we'll be able to see more realistically how long it will take.
I'll just check in with the internal auditors. The timing of everything being the same, you know, like reporting Q1, everything that's being observed, have resolution on that. You're comfortable with that?
A part of our process is for each committee meeting to follow up with management and find out how their plan is moving along. So through that process, if management at Dearness does report back that there's been a delay or there's some further work that needs to be done, we review the action plans, go over it with them, and report back to the committee accordingly as well. So I think from this perspective, in terms of the strategy that they've come up with, for the given year, it gives them an opportunity to try to implement it. If there are changes that are needed, then we need to pause and regroup and re-strategize on what the right timeline is.
Okay, thank you. Can I have a motion for 4.1 through 4.6? I think we've reached the end of that discussion. Councillor Turner, seconder. Councillor Van Holst? Yeah, to receive all of those reports. Well, go ahead, Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you very much. I wanted to ask about the process digitization. There's some great recommendations here. I wanted to know if the Dearness Home has the human resources available to work on these things. Or do we need to provide you with some more resources to realize some of these suggestions?
Specialists. Some of the work that we're thinking of doing in terms of utilizing technology would be to use things that are quite simple and already accessible. For example, Excel spreadsheets that we don't currently use, or we currently have a point-click care system that we use for our nursing needs and for our administration needs in terms of census and billing and trust. There may be some more functionality we can get out of that system as well. But certainly we would be engaging with IT if there's particular processes that we want to work on. There is the IT project portal process that we can work through if we identify particular issues that we think need more IT assistance from. But again, as we go through the upcoming year and we work on our processes and we start to see opportunities to improve them through that work, that will identify where the gaps are, where the opportunities lie, and where we might need extra help from IT.
Thanks, and I'll just recommend that you check with them, show them what you're planning, because they can provide some pretty great advice and probably some ideas that you hadn't thought of that might be easier or better.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, seeing no further discussion, all those in favor? That's carried. That brings us to the 2020 to 2022 internal audit plan. And I will just, before you get started, say I appreciate the changes to the report. Makes it very clear about what things are moving around and where they're going. I know that was something the committee raised last time, and I think it's very helpful. Go ahead.
So in terms of the internal audit report, I know we talked through what the projects were at the last meeting. So the ask of the committee was for Appendix D, and that's what we've done in terms of showing you the summary of changes from why something may have been deferred or why it was removed from the plan. So I think from that perspective, if you've had the opportunity to look at Appendix D, I'd be open to take your questions if there's a particular concern you had.
Questions, colleagues? Looks like no questions answered by the report and being very clear about where things are going. Okay. We move on to the IT security audit report.
Okay, thank you. This report is a review of the boards, commissions, and corporations IT security. The scope of this in the report lists the different boards and commissions that were included. We reviewed the city's use of the cities of London's technology policies within the boards and commissions, general computer controls that are currently implemented, as well as the training and education program provided with respect to IT security. The one finding we have is in this report is related to the more the awareness of I guess the policies and procedures that are available on the portal from the City of London. And that is a key strength with the City of London, is that they do have a ITS service portal, as well as policies and procedures that are available to the boards and commissions. And the one finding, as I indicated, was related to the fact that there seemed to be a lack of awareness there, and we encourage the boards and commissions to improve that awareness. And there's been a commitment from management and the IT organization to help with that process to do some education at the board and commission level. I believe the timing is June or September, and we believe that's a reasonable time frame, especially given the numbers of entities they need to connect with.
Councillor Turner.
Thanks, through you, Mr. Chair. I was reading through this and I was just trying to get a sense of what the actual risk was. What does that look like, where the risk materializes? And what does it look like by having the boards and commissions do best practice, what do they need to do in order to mitigate the recommendation that's here?
I guess that would become more evident as they review how they've implemented the different policies and procedures within the boards and commissions. And it is different depending on the board and commission because there's varying levels of use of the city's resources. But certainly the ones that use the resources more fully and are more integrated into the city network, they are users on the city network. So you do want to have those employees at the same level as city employees from a security perspective because there is that exposure.
Thank you. So that would be things like remote access, anything that provides any possible portal into the city's IT infrastructure, so so that people are aware of how they use and interact with the city's IT backbone. Is that what I'm reading?
Yes, it would include that.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Other discussion? Okay, I've got a question from the chair, and I'm not sure if it's for our internal auditors or perhaps for Mr. Daly, but just to give us a sense of how what kind of variation there is in terms of how agencies, boards, and commissions are using city resources or not. I would imagine looking at the organizations that some are more or less integrated and using more or less resources. I just wonder if you give us some examples, maybe one end of the spectrum and the other end.
Thank you. Pardon me. Thank you, and through the chair. This runs a very wide gambit to the chair. We have some institutions using very little of the IT backbone. We have other agencies, boards, and commissions quite closely integrated into our policies and our network. So when we look at the 16 different agencies, boards, and commissions that are presented in this report, there is a wide variance. Thank you.
Okay. I think we should take a motion on 4.7 and 4.8 because then we're moving on to the RFP, which is a bit of a different matter. Councillor Turner, is there a seconder? Councillor Van Holst, any other discussion? All those in favor? That's carried. Okay, the RFP for internal audit services, I think that's going to be Ms. Barbone. Go ahead.
Thank you through the chair. So we're coming up to the end of the contract at the end of the year. So one of the things that we're looking to do is try to manage the workload of having to do 2 RFPs at the exact same time. So historically, the last 2 have been done with internal audit and external audit at the same time. And what we found was the workload on staff to make that happen was very, very significant because it's all happening at the same time. The evaluation teams were pretty much consistent, so trying to create some separation is we don't have enough staff to be able to do that. But further, there's really no advantage to running 2 at the same time. We found that the proponents have been quite different, and because they can't be the same, because you need external and internal to be separate because of the reliance potentially upon one another, that having them run at the same time really has no advantage other than trying to put a whole lot of workload on staff all at the same time. So we're proposing that rather than exercise the final year extension, that it would make sense to go at the end of the first stage of the contract so that we can start to have one after the other rather than both happen at the same time and be able to administratively manage that burden a little bit more effectively.
Discussion. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes, I agree. That seems to be a good step forward. I recall when we did this last time, and it was even a little confusing. There's so much going on at the same time. So I think this is a helpful recommendation.
Councillor Turner.
I was just thinking the explanation from the treasurer helps. In reading the report, I wasn't sure why we wouldn't execute the final or the optional year if it makes sense to just throw them off cycle against each other, and that provides support and help for you. I think that's appropriate.
Okay, I'm sensing a motion based on the comments from my colleagues. Any other questions for Ms. Barbone? No? Is there a motion? Staff recommendation? Is that what you're, yeah? Seconder? Okay, all those in favor? It's carried. Okay, switching gears a little bit, Ms. Denbach.
Thank you very much. We're happy to be here today to walk you through the highlights of our audit plan for the year ending December 31st, 2019. Just for reference, this plan starts on page 75, I believe, of your agenda package, and we'll just go over some of the highlights. Obviously, we're happy to entertain any questions that the committee might have as we go through. I'm going to start right on page 3. Which just describes the scope of the audit. So this is considered a group audit simply by virtue of the fact that we issue an audit over the consolidated financial statements of the city. So it is comprised of one individually financially significant component, which would be the city itself, as well as 16 in-scope standalone audits on the boards and commissions, and 3 components that are considered to be non-significant that are not subject to their own audits. The little diagram here is just meant to show that KPMG are the auditors for each of those. Moving on to page 5, audit risks. So there's a couple of risks that we wanted to make the committee aware of. The first one is over the completeness of accruals. Similar to prior years, we've noted this as being an area of significant risk and therefore increased scrutiny as part of our audit. And this includes accruals such as legal and landfill liabilities, liabilities for contaminated sites, any areas that involve a significant amount of judgment and assumption in deriving the numbers that land on the financial statements. And I've listed here the procedures that we plan on performing over that specific area. Pages 6 and 7 talk about 2 risks which are standard to every audit that we perform. The first is the fraud risk from revenue recognition. We have actually rebutted that risk in the case of the City of London because we don't feel that the circumstances really warrant that to be a heightened risk. It's really more in the for-profit world, where you have people that are being remunerated based on a revenue number. The second one is the fraud risk from management override of controls. That one we do not rebut, and it is present in every organization. And so there are certain audit procedures that we perform in order to address that risk, similar to prior years. Pages 8 and 9 go over some areas of audit focus that we wanted to bring to your attention, and these are really due to the financial significance of the balances on the financial statements. So specifically capital projects and acquisitions, payroll and employee future benefits, as well as taxation, user charges, and transfer payment revenues. So we've listed on these pages the procedures that we intend to perform during the course of our audit over those areas. But just to note, this is definitely not a comprehensive list of the audit work that we do. It's more the areas we wanted to highlight for the committee.
Moving on to page 10 of our report, we've highlighted some other matters that we wanted to comment on. So one of those is that there are debt issuances of almost 50 million. So we do have procedures that we will perform over this number similar to prior years. We also want to highlight that there is a new entity, Hamilton Road BIA, that we will be performing an audit over this year and that will be consolidated into the city's financial statements. Moving on to page 11, we've laid out our materiality to be used for the group audit, as well as some additional information. So the materiality we will be using for this year is 17.2 million, which is 1.5% of the total prior year expenses, which ultimately means that we'll report to you any audit misstatements that we identify that are greater than 860,000 or reclassification misstatements that are greater than 4.3 million. Moving on to pages 12 and 13, this is really just some additional information for you on some of the technology that KPMG uses today, as we will be utilizing many of these tools during the course of the audit of the city. Pages 14 and 15 provide some additional information on technology that is currently under development and that we will look to possibly utilize in the future. Page 16 provides some additional information on our team. So that includes myself as well as Katie. And then Dania Nabani will also be providing assistance to the main city audit this year, as well as managing certain of the boards and commissions, and Deanna Baldwin will also be managing certain boards and commissions as well this year. On page 17, we've laid out some of our key deliverables and milestones, including meeting with management in January, having our audit plan discussion with you here today, our scheduled field work primarily in April and May, and then our audit findings discussion with you on June 24th. On page 18, we've laid out our proposed fees, which are in line with our proposal. And then page 19 is really some additional information on current developments and audit trends. So there are no new standards that are effective for fiscal 2019. However, there are several upcoming standards, which we've included some additional information on in Appendix 5. And the rest of this page is just some thought leadership again, just for your information. That brings us to the appendices. Appendices 1 through 3 are really additional information for you on our audit quality and risk management, our audit approach methodology, as well as some information on lean and audit. And then Appendix 4 goes over our required communications. This includes the engagement letter, our audit planning report, which we're presenting today. There are certain inquiries that we're required to go over with you, so we'll ensure that those are communicated in the future during the course of our audit. And then at the end of our audit, we will have receive the signed management representation letter, go over our findings through our audit findings report, as well as issue an annual independence letter. Appendix 5 provides the information on the upcoming changes to public sector accounting standards. The current one's expected. It lays out 3 on page 2 of this report of the current developments. So the first grouping will be effective for fiscal years beginning on or after April 1st, 2021, which for the city will be for fiscal 2022. Asset retirement obligations will become effective for that same year. And then the new revenue standard will be effective for the city starting fiscal 2023. So the remainder of the pages really provides some additional information on all of these upcoming standards. And then on page 20, which is the last page of these current developments, it also shows some active projects that the standard setters are looking at. So these could be some upcoming possible changes several years down the line, but just some things that they are looking at.
The last appendix in our report is the financial indicators or municipal benchmarking that you will have seen. We've done this for the last couple of years. And really we do it more for discussion purposes, for the committee to have a chance to kind of look at trends and compare to municipalities and see, you know, if there are any areas where there are questions or numbers that should be delved into. So one of the changes, I think the appendix itself is quite self-explanatory, but one of the changes we did make on your request was to add 5 years worth of comparative data. So this is based on publicly available FIR data, and the latest available data is fiscal 2018. So that's what we've included, the 5 years preceding that. So as you look through that, you can see overall the results are very consistent over the past 5 years when you add those comparative years in there. So that really wraps up our audit plan for fiscal 2019. Happy to take any questions that the committee has.
Turn to colleagues to see if you have questions about the audit plan. I know there's usually a lot of questions about the financial indicators. Maybe we hold those till after we get through the audit plan itself. Go ahead.
Thanks. Really, it's helpful. It gives a good picture of where we're heading. And I think I don't think I've asked this before, but as you see PSAB changes, obviously that's going to change the report year on year, and so it's not as apples to apples. It's say 2014's fiscal versus the 2021 because the PSAB requirements have changed. What considerations do you do? I guess that basically makes notes on those audits to say these rules have changed, so they might differ from reporting in previous years? Or?
Yes, that's exactly right. Through you, Mr. Chair. when a new standard is issued, there's always guidance that says whether you are allowed to apply it on a prospective basis, so for the year of adoption going forward, or whether you are required to apply it on a retrospective basis, which would include restating comparative figures so that it would be apples to apples. So for the standards that are coming out, it's kind of a mixed bag, but I believe on the most, for the most part, they are prospectively adopted. And so what you will see is note disclosure in the financial statements to describe what new standards were adopted, the changes that arose in those standards, and the actual number that was impacted in the financial statements as a result of adoption.
And looking through those, I'm just trying to think from the reader's perspective to be able to take a look and say, how has the city's position changed from year to year? Not many of those seem material, except perhaps the retirement of assets, which might be a fair, when we're taking a look at some major capital, that might really change that position if we look prospectively. And I think there was a retrospective component to that too, wasn't there? So.
I see a lot of nodding. Other questions about the audit plan? Councillor Van Holst?
Just one question for my own interest. In the changes, there was a lot of discussion about derivatives, and I wonder how relevant that would be to a city.
In my view at this point, it won't be particularly relevant. There are some derivatives that the city does have related to gas contracts, I believe. Yeah, Annalise is nodding. So at the moment, those aren't given recognition, you know, the fair market value of those isn't given recognition in the financial statements. That is likely to change with the adoption of the new standard. So the new standard really does require certain types of investments to be recorded at their fair market value as opposed to the original cost, which is what the old public sector standards required.
Thank you. And the nods from staff seem reasonable. I don't think we hedge anything except fuel costs, or do we? The chair?
Through the chair, the only one, as Ms. Denbach had mentioned, is definitely our natural gas contracts. That is something that we've had for a number of years. Other than that, there isn't anything, although from the investment portfolio perspective, that will then start to see as you have shifts from year to year in the fair market value, you will see differences where previously until you sell it, you're not going to realize a gain or loss. You will be recording those. So that will significantly be a change that as we bring that forward to let council know what that's going to do to our financial statements. So there are a number of impacts that we see coming, and they will be far beyond just those small little use of derivatives that we currently use.
Any other questions? No? I have one about the taxation, user charges, transfer payments, revenue risk. It occurs to me that as we go through these cycles of reassessment, that especially commercial and industrial properties, they might have more or less reason to appeal, and that's one of the assumptions that's built into how we're going to get our tax revenue. And some of these things have a pretty long lag, and is that something that you look at when you're looking at how the taxation revenue is being estimated? What is the chance of appeals? How does that affect the revenue that actually arrives at the city, and are those estimates reasonable? Is that something you're looking at?
Yes, it is. So as part of our audit, we are looking not only at the revenue side, but also the taxation receivable side, which would include a component that deals with appeals or any estimated reductions in taxes receivable. So yes, that is part of our audit process.
Thank you. Okay, do I have a motion on the audit plan? Moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Van Holst. Any further discussion? All those in favor? It's carried. Okay, that brings us to CMMS, the internal audit report on that. So back over to you.
Thank you.
And I just want to recognize, I see Mr. McRae in the back. Nice to have you back in the council chambers.
Thank you. The CMMS review focused on the project to implement a computerized maintenance and management system project for the water and sewer departments. This project, the original implementation was scheduled for September 30th, 2019. There was some delay in that implementation for various reasons to October 31st. And as part of that launch, the decision was made to do a soft launch. So in water and sewer, there were 16 functionalities that were being implemented. In the end, what was implemented was one functionality within the water group. So there's limited functionality implemented at this point as an update to the committee. The strengths that we found within this process included the IT operations, from the sense that there is a backup process in place from a technical perspective. There's an infrastructure plan in the sense that there's a plan around how the infrastructure is implemented, and much of that would be completed for that one process. And that would be putting the servers, databases, and that sort of thing in place. And then as far as deployment of those was in place. As a overall or overarching comment, just to summarize the 6 high priority items, 3 medium priority items, most of them relate to documentation, communication, and planning for the implementation of the system, would be an overall summary comment. Did you want me to go through each of the findings? I know there's a number of them there. I certainly can.
Look to committee to see how you'd like to proceed. Do you want to go through them one by one? Just use your mic.
I think because I have the impression this didn't go well, perhaps we could go through those. I would appreciate it.
Go ahead.
Okay. Maybe what I'll do is I'll read from the summary, executive summary, and then if there's questions on specific items, we can flip to those pages and go through the detail in more detail. Does that sound appropriate? Okay. So the first one is around communication. The indication there was a high-level plan for communication that dates back to the previous project manager and implementation plan that has not been updated, and our feeling is that really should be something that is a living document and is updated ongoing. So I'll just pause for a second as we go through each of them.
Councillor Van Holst.
Okay, thank you. So your statement was that as it hasn't been updated here in the report, it said it hadn't been actioned, and that which department or part of a department specifically was that manager working in? And can you just, I'm sorry, tell me if the plan had not been actioned, that we didn't do anything with the plan, or it just needs to be updated?
Yeah, I think for all these items, it would be in the water and sewer department with support from different organizations within the city, but mainly water and sewer.
I'm just going to check in with Mr. Mathers about that.
Through the chair, just to kind of set the stage for this as well. This is a very complex project that touches several different areas of the city. So our steering committee is made up of engineering, which is on the transportation side, the water wastewater side, and we also have support there from finance and from IT. As far as the actual implementation of the project management is out of the transportation group, and the primary two processes that we're looking at is water and wastewater.
Thank you. Hopefully that's helpful, committee. Okay. More questions about that first observation? Good.
Right, and maybe just a comment from our staff, just regard to the actions that have been taken on that, or their plans to update that report then.
I'm going to let the auditor answer, but the action plan is listed on page 149. It says, update the existing communications plan. A resource has been identified to help the project manager with communication duties. There's 3 items that are listed off there. Any other questions about the first observation? No, go ahead, second one.
Yeah, the next one was specific to training around the CityWorks software is currently ad hoc. That's not to say there's no training, it's just that it's not formalized.
Any questions about that one? Councillor Turner.
Just looking in the action plan, the stakeholder workshops will be used to review the business processes and update the UAT scripts. Stakeholders, am I getting the right thing? Or did I jump? No, training, develop. In that action plan, develop and execute training plan that includes sufficient, create simple training materials, identify a dedicated training coordinator. Is part of that plan also to identify those who have not been, to create that inventory of those who have been trained and those who have not?
Through the chair, absolutely. And a lot of this goes back to, and I think that's a really good point that the auditor's made, is just the ad hoc versus very formalized documentation. So what we'll be moving towards, and that's part of the recommendations, is to move to more formalized documentation. So we did have training materials. However, we could do a much better job at developing a training plan, as that was one of the reasons why we put the project on hold.
Councillor Van Olst.
Thank you. Could staff give a sense to us of about how many members of the team would need to be trained on this item?
Through the chair, it's under 20 staff. It's for the most part the supervisors in the water and wastewater area, and then also the management staff there as well.
Any other questions about that observation? If not, let's move on to the next one.
Yeah, this relates to the documentation and approval of business process controls. So that would include identifying the process flows and maps, as well as any risks and the mitigation of those risks through the identification and implementation of controls as part of the implementation. We found that that process was not documented in a formal way.
Continue on.
Okay, the next one was around interface strategies. I believe that this may have been part of the delay, was the lack of documentation around the data flows and the data that need to be moved between various systems, and the planning for that, and ultimately the potential for the programming required for that. So that's something that we would want to see formalized and identified early in the process as well.
Any questions on that? No? Go ahead.
Similarly, strategy for reports. This is where the software itself comes with a certain number of reports as a core functionality, but item number 3.01 would identify, or 2.01, I'm sorry, would identify within the process if there's any reports that are custom for the city that may require programming to create those reports, and having a strategy for the resourcing and the creation of those reports, and then the implementation of them within the system.
Okay, thank you. And how extensive would that be? How many custom reports do we think we would be looking at through you, Mr. Chair, to our staff?
Through the chair. So we actually have started this analysis. The way that the software works is that there's some out-of-box reports that you can just hit a button and have them created. We've gone through that list, and that covers off all of our needs from the perspective of the water wastewater group. And so we don't anticipate any custom reports. The other piece of functionality that this software has, and the reason why I selected it, is it allows you to do all sorts of ad hoc reports on your data sets. So if there isn't something that's within those pre-created set of reports, we also have that ability to be able to create ad hoc reports. So we don't foresee any custom reports being required.
Thanks. And just from our interest through the chair, what might be an example of one of the ad hoc reports you could see this program being an advantage to us for?
Through the chair, so one great example of that might be, it's all GIS based, so you can look at the city geographically. So an example might be, right now we have a service standard to flush our sewers out once every 2 years. What we could do is actually look at areas and flag areas that may need less frequency because the sewers are newer and aren't having problems. So that would allow us to allocate those resources to other areas in the water sewer area. So that's just one example, but really you could apply it to anything else, hydrants, maintenance of valves, those types of things as well, and look at it from a geographic perspective.
Okay, well, that's great. That amount of savvy will allow us to save some funds. So thank you. It sounds like it was a good choice.
Any questions on that one, Councillor Turner? Okay, go ahead.
Okay. The next one is number 4, around segregation of access and change documentation and lack of segregation of duties in the change management process. This is really the fact that, you know, that there wasn't a formalization of who could make changes and the approval process for those changes. And we feel that that may have actually been remediated already, so.
You're on a roll, keep going.
Okay. Key performance indicators and performance metrics, we feel that they should be established within 4CMMS.
Okay, and just through you to staff, do we think we'll be on track with that?
Through the chair, yes, we're actually on track of that, and we've started to develop that list, and so not a problem.
Thank you.
6 relates to ensuring that there's a formalized process for adding and deleting users from the system.
Okay, thank you. I guess that's probably most likely in the event of retirements or things like that. All right, thank you. If we could go on to the password configurations.
Okay, and this was a limitation with the system itself, that it didn't meet the IT security policies for the city. So it's more a matter of noting that and, you know, then indicating that maybe they work with the vendor to improve the password configuration.
Okay, thanks. And maybe through you to our IT staff for a comment on this. Is there some actions we need to take in the meantime?
Thank you, and through the chair, we do not see any reason to take action on this. The vendor is aware of this. They have it, my understanding is that they have it in their work plan to look at this. So information security is a hot topic right now, but vendors are responding to these types of requests. I believe that this will not be an issue in the future. Thank you.
Councillor Turner.
Thanks. Just back to the previous one there. So CMMS itself as a software program doesn't provide control over any operations. It's a reporting function. So having a delayed removal of users or having too broad a scope of user authorizations doesn't propose any physical risk or any real material risk. It's just a question of whether more knowledge might get into somebody's hands. Is that correct?
Through the chair, that's absolutely accurate. It does not control any of our equipment or our SCADA system, as we call it. So this is completely separate from that. So it's really just the ability to access that, and this would limit it if you have the appropriate users using the software.
One last one.
Yeah, so the last one was more a leading practice and had very limited risk to the organization. It was more just a documentation around the requirement and need for data conversion, which was very limited in this project.
All right, and that one caught my eye because I know in some cases we don't, or at least in one case I know where we weren't sure where some of our infrastructure was. That was I think a sewer line out near a meadow lily that some residents wanted to hook up to, but then we said, well, you're going to have to spend the money to find out where it is. So is that the kind of data is that the kind of thing we're talking about here in terms of legacy data?
Through the chair, So there'd be, I guess, two types of data. One that you're suggesting, which would be our actual infrastructure information that it does interface with this. For the most part, the data that I think where the auditor's going with it is if we have any historical work order information, or if we want to put any of our paper-based documentation into the software. That wasn't something that we were looking at going back and historically trying to populate the data set. If we had information in easily readily accessible forms like Excel sheets and stuff, we might get into that. But for the most part, everything is paper-based right now, so we aren't looking at incorporating any of the past data.
Okay, well, that sounds like it would be a great deal of work, but if the auditors are satisfied there's not a great deal of risk there, that's fine. Thank you.
Any other discussion on the CMMS review? Okay, just from the chair, a lot of the timing for the recommendations is either in the immediate past or in the immediate future. I guess a question for Mr. Stronghill, who is welcome to committee. You're listed as the lead for all these things. How is it going, and are you on track in terms of actioning these things?
Thanks. Through the chair. It's actually going quite well. We are ahead of schedule on most of this stuff. We've got it all drafted out, and we've been working with the team to get prepared for the relaunch, so to speak. Yeah, I don't think there's any sticking points in there right now.
Great, thank you. I just want to say, I think these pre-implementation reviews, they can be a little bit painful, I think, but helpful in the sense that they identify some issues before they really become big problems. And I think it's helping us make the thing better in the longer term. So I appreciate the report. I think this shows the value of this kind of internal audit where you're like, hey, there's an issue here with the documentation, communications, those issues can be actioned, and we can move ahead in a more effective way. So I want to thank the staff who worked on it, and also the internal auditors. I think this is a good example of how you can really add a lot of value, you know, identify some issues and get them sorted out very quickly. So thanks. A motion to receive that report. Councillor Van Hol, seconder. Councillor Turner. All those in favor? Okay, that's carried. Thank you. CCTV. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So included in page 166 of your package is our annual report on the results of applying specified auditing procedures over the CCTV program. So this is what we call a procedures and findings report that we have been engaged to do for a number of years now, where we perform specific agreed upon procedures and provide the results of those procedures via this report to the committee for your review. So
is that a motion or a whole lot of questions?
Quick question.
Go ahead.
Just a funny question more than anything. Through you, Mr. Chair. What does camera one point it at? And not a safe or a valuable object or anything like that for the 18 seconds that we didn't get footage.
So camera one, as well as through the chair, camera one and all the other cameras rotate on a 360-degree location through the 17 corners in downtown London. So it's not fixated on any particular item. From time to time, there are interruptions due to weather, technical issues. Happens fairly rarely, though.
Fair enough, thanks.
Move in.
Yes, I'm happy to move that. The
Seconder.
report was very clear. I was happy.
Thank you. I'm glad to see, in past reports, we've had more issues with, you know, being able to obtain footage and things like that. And I'm glad to see that there's not a lot of those issues here. I know sometimes it's a bit random why that happens, but I appreciate the report. Okay, all those in favor? It's carried. Thank you. That brings us to the class replacement project pre-implementation review. So go ahead. I'll just check with the committee. Do you want to go through each of these observations individually, or just an overview of all of them, and then we'll get into discussion? Overview? Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. The class replacement relates to a system that's being implemented. It is a cloud solution related to the Parks and Recreation operations. It is nearing full implementation at this point, so this report will lead into probably a final report in the near future. The findings would be similar, I think, to some other implementations in the sense that around the formality of the project plan and the project reporting, as well as some of the nuances around cloud in the sense that the processes don't connect directly into the city. And so, for instance, the user setup process is something where you need to contact a vendor to actually set up that user, as well as if there's an outage in that system. It's not like a city system where the IT team would report to you that system is out. It's something where the vendor would need to have a communication process around that. So that's the nature of these findings that we have at this point. And then there's one finding around a leading practice around having KPIs around the performance of that vendor, and becomes more important when it's a cloud solution because it is a third party that's operating that. And the other piece of that is that currently there is not an audit report on that vendor and the controls that they have in place around the general computer controls and security. It's specifically on the cloud solution provider, I believe it's Amazon. And so it would be the core infrastructure, but not the actual application. So that's something that management's looking into to obtain that actual audit report on those controls. So that's the summary.
Any questions about this pre-implementation review? Okay. Motion to, there you go. Seconded. All those in favor? Carried. Thanks very much, Mr. Stafford, Mr. Oldham. Stuck it out right to the end. Okay, that brings us to the end of the meeting. Any additional business? Not seeing any. We have to go into a closed session to deal with one item. I wonder, colleagues, the reason is listed on the agenda, but is there a motion to go into closed session? Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Van Holst. All those in favor? Okay, committee room 3, right? Yeah, committee room 3. And I think since we already asked about additional business, we'll probably adjourn from committee room 3. So we'll go back into public session in there. Anyone who's watching the meeting, pop by there when the door opens.